So, July 13th, 1990, I was arrested for drunk driving. They brought me to jail and threw me into a holding cell. It was pitch black, and I was in that cell alone. And I tried to sit on the little bench, but I didn't have enough wherewithal to balance myself there. So I laid on the floor, and I passed out cold. Next thing I remember, I'm awake on the floor of a pitch black holding cell, and I leave my body, and I look down, and I see myself curled up, and what I see is pitiful, pathetic, helpless, hopeless. I'm filled with what they call the four hideous horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. I was in trouble, and for the first time, for some reason, I left my body and saw it. The next morning, the judge sentenced me to 6 months in a recovery program, and I went. I got sober. A little while after that, I started writing songs. I grabbed onto songwriting as if I was drowning in an ocean and it was a life jacket. Turns out I was, and it was. My songs were somber, serious. I wrote about the struggle. I wrote about the things that landed me in that jail cell in the first place. And I'd go out and play my little songs, and I'd get two reactions. Half the room would say, "Oh my God, this is so dark. This is so serious." And I'd get the cliche, "Break out the razor blades." The other half would come up to me after the show and say, with tears in their eyes, "Thank you. Thank you. You're telling my story." Those people helped me to keep going. I sort of fancied myself sort of a lesbian Leonard Cohen. Except I sing country music, so it just didn't work out that way. But I stayed sober, and I continue to do songwriting that way, and the room is always split in half when I play, if people aren't familiar with my songs. I learned a lot about songwriting over the last 28 years now, and what I know is that songs are a lot more than just a product for a commercial marketplace. For me, songs and songwriting combined with recovery really helped save my life. The songs help connect me to people and reconnect me to me. And I also understand songwriting in a way that transcends rational thought. It's alchemy, really. I use the example of a flesh wound. When we cut ourselves, there's things in the body that happen that rush to the wound and help us to heal almost immediately. There's coagulants. There's white blood cells that come in and start attacking the bacteria. I think songs and music can do the same thing for a wound of the soul and of the heart. In fact, I know it to be true because I'm standing up here telling you about it after having done it for 28 years. Here's what I know. Songs are more than songs. They're more than just a song. About 5 years ago, I was invited to work with an organization called Songwriting with Soldiers. It's a nonprofit founded by a songwriter named Arden Smith out of Austin, Texas. What they do is pair 6 to 10 wounded veterans with 4 professional songwriters at a retreat center for a weekend. We start on a Friday and on a Sunday, and on Sunday night we usually have 10, maybe even 15 brand new songs that didn't exist before that retreat. And the songs are written in the words of the veterans. They show up reluctant. They often are dragged there by their wives, or it's strongly recommended that they come by their therapists. They show up with the look in their eye like kumbaya may be an all-time low. They're not convinced when they arrive that a song is what they need. But so many of our veterans are in trouble, they're willing to try anything. We're in a crisis with our veterans. We're losing 22 a day to suicide. So the work that we do with Songwriting with Soldiers, I think, is a very important contribution to what is understood around using songs for more than just a commercial product. The best way to describe the way the retreats work is to introduce you to Joe. I want to tell you about Joe. When I met Joe, he was suffering, he was struggling. He had been deployed to Fallujah in Iraq during the surge. And what happened to him there hurt him deeply. When I got him, he went over there at 19. When I got him, he was in his mid-20s. He had deep, deep lines in his forehead. He wasn't making eye contact. He was looking down a lot. He was answering sentences with one word. He wasn't able to be part of the group. He removed himself a lot. And when we sat down to write, I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I don't know what to say, Mary. I just know my soul hurts." I said, "Joe, if you'll give me some pictures of what you saw when you got off that plane in Fallujah, I think we'll get you a song today." And he said, "Okay." And he started giving me visuals of what he saw. I know a song should be a little movie. I know as a songwriter that the best songs bring you along for the ride by showing you pictures. And so as he started feeding me pictures, I started to hear a song come in. He said, what I saw was yellow smoke and orange haze everywhere. Every evening at dusk, there were sunset bombs coming in. He said, I couldn't trust the sky. He said there were little kids in the street crying, no adults in sight. There were bombed out schools and bombed out homes. He said there were guys holding their rifles with white knuckles. There were other guys, Catholic soldiers, with rosary beads, rolling them in their hands. As he spoke, I started to think of a melody that might work with the emotions he was able to express and the visuals he was giving me. And so I just did this very simple thing. And he kept talking, and the melody started to open him up more. And I noticed he was answering questions now in sentences. And we reached a place where he was almost on the verge of tears, and I had to put the guitar down and cry. What he said was so moving. That's the great thing about being a songwriter and not a therapist. Our job as a songwriter in these retreats is not to diagnose or assess. We just bear witness. And we sit in the discomfort of the story with the veteran and turn it into a song. And as I cried, he cried, and we just let it rip. Big old nasty tears. And then the emotion had moved through, and we were in eye contact. I noticed that the deep lines in his forehead were starting to loosen up. When we finished his song, stacked the images that he described to me, really. When we finished it, I put the guitar down and we high-fived. And then we screamed like we won the football game and did the touchdown dance and ran around the room. It's the saddest song you've ever heard, but we were so happy. And I know, as someone who's been writing sad songs for so long, that singing the blues can make you feel better. But when we went that night back to the group with his song, the joy that he had expressed in, really, the co-write becomes a confessional. So the joy that he had expressed in that little room with me sort of evaporated when he realized his confessions were about to be played for his peers. It's a moment of vulnerability that can terrify someone who's trained to be in the special forces and is one of the badass soldiers of all time. It can be the most terrifying moment to have their song be on display in front of their friends. And I think the reason is that when you're a soldier, you can't be vulnerable. Vulnerability will get you killed. But when you're writing a song, you have to be vulnerable or the song sucks. But when Joe realized it was fixing to be played, he was terrified again. And I saw the lines come back and his mouth reset itself in that straight line that it was in before we had started writing. But I knew what was going to happen when I played it. And as I played it, his friends put their hands on his shoulder. And they nodded. And when the song was done, they high-fived him. And they thanked him. Like the people in the audience who don't leave my shows. Thank me. The joy on his face was immeasurable. He had put some of his shame into that song. If you've been traumatized, you carry shame. Shame is part of trauma because you weren't able to avoid the horrible thing that happened. You're ashamed of it. You think it's your fault. And so you have this sense of being broken. I watch when we do the work with the veterans, that shame. I've seen it for 5 years. I've lived it. I know this feeling. Songs can alchemize that shame. It happens when someone says, "Me too." So the high fives he got brought the joy back. And Joe has gone on to finish his degree at UT and get a master's degree up in Kalamazoo, and now he's on the staff of the university up there, and he's teaching doctors. He's doing great. I want to just play a little bit of the song I wrote with Joe. Rifles and rosary beads, you hold on to what you need. Vicodin, morphine dreams, rifles and rosary beads. So what happens in these co-writes? What happens with these songs that is alchemizing? I think 3 things are going on. 1, the person who's dealing with trauma is being witnessed in non-judgment. The songwriter does not assess or judge. We don't diagnose. We just bear witness, and we sit in the discomfort of the story, and we mirror back what we're told, and we turn it into a piece of art. 2, the story, the song, then gets played in front of a group of peers who, instead of rejecting the person who's dealing with the struggle, the trauma, instead of rejection, what they get is embraced with love and gratitude. And 3, what happens is that the person who's been traumatized goes from being the story, and if you've been traumatized, you think you are the story. You can't get separation from it. But when you write the story, and the songs are all co-written with the veterans, you become the storyteller. You literally pull the story out of you, put it on a piece of paper or on a laptop, and step back and can get some distance from it and see it differently. And when you're the storyteller, you get some agency over that story, and you know that you're not only the story. I mean, human beings are stardust incarnate. We're not just our story. We're full of possibilities, but when you've been traumatized, you don't feel that anymore. And the big deal about being the storyteller is you get to write the ending. Why does this matter? Well, we're dealing with trauma as a culture. Upwards of 70% of the population at one time or another is going to have to deal with a traumatic incident. Our veterans are just the most obvious group dealing with trauma right now. There's so much trauma in society. And I think that it's very important to study and learn new ways to deal with it. Trauma causes the feeling of removal, separation. I no longer am part of the group. This machine, it can be a lot of things. I mean, we're in Nashville. We all know it's a moneymaker. It could be a tool of seduction. It could be an anesthetic, put us all to sleep. But in the right hands, for the right reasons, this is an empathy machine. And if you've been traumatized, you can't find your way home. The road home, it's paved in empathy. People ask me, can songs change the world? That sounds like some hippie dream from some pot smoke room from long ago. Well, my answer is that I think it depends on how they're written and why they're written. But yeah, I know a song can change a heart. A song can bring us into the experience of someone else so that we not only understand it, but we feel it. That's empathy. When you change a heart, it can lead to a mind being changed. And if you change a mind, well, I think you may have changed a person. If you change a person, doesn't that change the world? I believe I've been saved by a song. And the veterans we've been working with tell us that when their song gets played back and they witness their own story in song, they experience hope. This is a really important thing. Hope. I don't think it's going to heal, fix, solve trauma. It's like a ladder. The song is like a ladder lowered into the hole, into the deep, dark well. It's a rung. But that rung, if you're in the hole, it's a big damn deal.